My name is Catherine, and I've never attracted attention to myself in my 25 years. And it's not that I'm complaining about it. Rather, it always seemed to me that there was some hidden advantage to it. When you're in the shadows, you're not expected to perform feats, you're not forced to shine, you're not required to prove anything other than one's own competence, which is expressed in a job done flawlessly and without problems. That's exactly how I lived. I worked as a manager at a travel company where I had been for 3 years. Every day went according to my usual routine: morning coffee in my favorite small kitchen, a short walk to the office, 8 hours at my computer, and then back home, where a cozy sofa, books, and a cup of tea were waiting for me. Sometimes I met with friends or visited my parents on weekends, but in general my life flowed smoothly, predictably, and it seemed to me that this was quite normal. I never aspired to noisy parties, crowded clubs, or large crowds, preferring a cozy corner of my world. I should probably thank my sister Sarah for this, because it was with her that I realized that I didn't have to fight for a place in the spotlight, because it would always belong to her anyway. We grew up together, but we were strikingly different from childhood. While she was shining on the stage of the school theater, I sat in the hall doing my homework. While she easily became class president, I just completed my assignments without striving for fame, but she always managed to outshine me without even making an effort. I remember well the moment when my mother, after another performance in which Sarah played the main role, turned to me with that familiar disappointed expression on her face and gently but persistently asked, "Catherine, why don't you try it next time? It would be great if you could participate like your sister." I just shrugged and went to my room, knowing full well that they would never be able to accept the fact that I didn't have to be like Sarah to feel happy, but apparently that was never enough. The comparisons didn't stop. No matter how many years passed, my every achievement was always overshadowed by her brilliant successes, and when we went to college, the situation only worsened. Sarah chose a teaching profession, but in her second year she started working as a model, walked the runway, appeared in fashion magazines, and eventually gave up altogether teaching, because the modeling career was already going uphill. Then Marcus appeared, the perfect man from a wealthy family, with expensive cars, designer suits, and connections that opened doors to the most prestigious places for Sarah, and from that moment on, family dinners became something like a weekly show in which Sarah and Marcus starred. Every Sunday, we gathered around the table, and everyone's attention was always focused on Sarah, who enthusiastically talked about how last week Marcus gave her a diamond necklace, and then a new iPhone, and then a handbag that cost more than my monthly rent, and then it turned out that his family owns an amazing summer house, and they plan to spend the weekend there. My parents hung on her every word, my mom beamed with pride, my dad agreed, and I just remained silent, picking at my plate with a fork, knowing that I had nothing to say, because my successes in this family were never taken seriously. Last week, I got a promotion to senior manager, and it was an important step in my career, with a good raise, new responsibilities, and growth prospects, but when I tried to talk about it over a family dinner, my voice was drowned out by Sarah's enthusiastic stories about the upcoming trip to Paris, new shows, about fashion photographers who already see her as a new style icon. My parents listened to her with undisguised admiration, and at some point I just fell silent, realizing that no one was interested in my news, and this was probably the final touch that put an end to my attempts to feel meaningful in their eyes for once. Another Saturday came, and once again I found myself walking along the familiar path to my parents' house, mentally preparing for another evening in which I once again had to watch a vivid performance, in which my sister traditionally played the main role. The morning air was fresh, and the autumn wind was brushing through the fallen leaves, but as soon as I got close to the door, I heard an excited squeal that sent an involuntary chill down my spine. I hadn't put the key in the lock yet when the door swung open with a bang, and Sarah stormed out of the house, her face flushed with excitement, her eyes shining, and even the light curls perfectly arranged on her shoulders seemed to bounce with joy. She was practically jumping up and down when, without giving me a second to realize what was happening, she grabbed my hand and enthusiastically held out her left palm right in front of my face. A massive diamond ring sparkled on her ring finger, which caught the light and scattered its glare on the porch walls, and before I could say anything, Sarah screamed, spinning on the spot, like a little girl who had just been given a long-awaited doll. He proposed, her voice rang with happiness, and I involuntarily glanced towards the house, where our parents had already appeared, clearly ready to take part in this triumphant moment. Marcus asked me to marry him. Sarah clapped her hands, as if she still could not believe what had happened, but her radiant look, full of genuine triumph, spoke for itself. Mom came out right behind her, dabbing her eyes with a paper napkin, and even though her mascara was slightly smudged from crying, her face was beaming with happiness. Dad, standing next to her, hugged Sarah by the shoulders, looking like he was going to burst with pride. "We're having an engagement party here," Sarah announced, barely catching her breath, and before I could say anything, she was already pacing the living room with her phone in her hand, texting and giving orders at the same time. "Marcus' parents will come, their relatives too, and it will be absolutely perfect. We need to make guest lists." Mom immediately intervened, excitedly grabbing a notebook from the table. "What about Uncle Robert? He now has a successful law firm." Sarah nodded, and then added, "And Cousin Emily? She's a surgeon in Boston now. We can't forget her." "Oh, and Professor James," Dad said, "the brother who heads the chemistry department." They huddled around the coffee table, writing down names, and I, still standing at the door, holding my purse in my hands, began to feel like part of the furniture, like a piece of furniture that no one even thinks about. They made their perfect list, filling it with people they considered worthy, and I already knew what would happen next. They would start crossing out anyone who did not meet their standards of success. "What about Aunt Martha?" Dad suggested thoughtfully, but Sarah immediately wrinkled her nose, as if she had tasted something sour. "The one who works at the supermarket?" Her voice sounded a little squeamish, and before her father could finish, she shook her head emphatically. "No, of course not. We cannot allow Marcus' family to meet with such people." They continued the list, systematically excluding everyone who, in their opinion, did not fit into this glossy, shiny world. Factory workers, teachers, retail workers, they all disappeared at the stroke of a pen, as if their existence was not valuable enough to become a part of this event. I couldn't help myself. Maybe it was the absurdity of the whole scene, maybe I just wanted to see how they would react, but I laughed softly and shrugged my shoulders and remarked, "Well, I guess I shouldn't expect an invitation then. The manager of a travel company is unlikely to impress anyone." There was silence in the room. Sarah looked up from her list, her perfectly groomed eyebrows furrowed in mild annoyance, and at that moment I could almost see a thought racing through her head, as if she'd just remembered that I even existed. "Well." She hesitated, as if choosing her words, and then, taking a short breath, she said clearly and steadily, "I suppose you'll have to come. Marcus knows that I have a sister, and it would be strange if you weren't there." She returned to her list, adding more casually, almost with a sigh, "It would be awkward to explain your absence." I felt like I'd been hit, but not because of Sarah's words. I'd expected something like this, knowing her character and habit of putting herself above others. No, the most painful thing was seeing Mom and Dad just nod, as if it were something completely reasonable, as if her role at her engagement party was really just to avoid the awkwardness, as if the fact that their youngest daughter was invited to such a significant family event solely for the sake of propriety was the most natural thing in the world. The date for the celebration was set a few weeks in advance, and realizing that next weekend at my parents' house would inevitably turn into endless engagement talks, I made the firm decision to skip my usual visits, not because I was angry or offended, but rather because I didn't see the point in watching over and over again how their whole life revolves around a single daughter, while I remain somewhere on the periphery of their attention. Every time I called, there was chaos coming from the phone. Mom was arguing with the catering staff, claiming that the chosen menu did not correspond to the status of the event. Dad was discussing the selection of wines with someone, and Sarah's voice carried over all this fuss, giving commands like a conductor leading an orchestra that was supposed to perform her melody with absolute precision. After 3 weeks of endless preparations, my phone finally rang, and when my sister's name appeared on the screen, I was surprised, It was the first time she had called me since that evening when we discussed the guest list. "Hi," I replied, internally preparing for another criticism, knowing in advance that the conversation was unlikely to be pleasant. "I finally got my dress," Sarah announced as if this was a world-class event, not even bothering to greet me. "Custom, made for $5,000. Marcus's mother went to the boutique with me, and she said I looked like a real princess." I made an indeterminate sound, something between an and an O, but Sarah, as usual, didn't expect a reaction from me. "By the way, you need to buy yourself some decent clothes." Her voice changed, taking on that commanding tone I grew up with, which meant that objections were not accepted. "And I mean really decent, not your usual thrift store look." I gripped the phone tighter, trying not to let my irritation get the better of me, and answered cautiously. "My clothes are in perfect order." "No, it's not okay," Sarah said peremptorily, without even letting me finish. "You look like a scarecrow most of the time. I don't want you to embarrass me at my engagement party. Buy something suitable. And for God's sake, do something with your hair for once." I didn't even have time to answer. There were short beeps on the phone. She just hung up, leaving me standing in the middle of the room with the phone in my hands and that familiar mix of pain and anger that has become almost familiar over the years. But somewhere beneath all this resentment, there was a small voice that, oddly enough, was a voice of doubt. Maybe she was right? When was the last time I really dressed up for something? When I allowed myself to look different than usual? When I allowed myself to feel beautiful? The next day, after taking half a day off, I went shopping. I went from boutique to boutique, sorting through the endless rows of dresses, but I couldn't find anything. Everything seemed either too pretentious or too ordinary, and I was about to give up when I suddenly saw him. The dress was a rich emerald green, elegant and restrained, just below the knees, with a perfectly fitted cut that emphasized my curves, which I did not even know existed. This color made my eyes even greener, and the soft fabric fit my figure nicely. The saleswoman smiled and offered me the perfect shoes to complete the look, and the moment I looked at myself in the mirror for the first time in many years and saw not just a girl who was used to blending into the background, but a woman who could look great if she wanted to, I suddenly felt something similar to confidence. The day of the engagement finally arrived. I took extra care getting ready. The dress was hanging on the closet door, waiting in the wings, and looking at it, I decided to go ahead and really invest in my image for the first time in a long time. I signed up for a salon where a stylist literally created a miracle. My usually straight hair turned into soft, flowing waves that framed my face perfectly, and my makeup, light and refined, gave me the look I so often lacked, the look of a woman who knows what she wants. When I arrived at my parents' house, the place had already completely transformed. Garlands twinkled on the trees, creating a magical glow, and the front yard was filled with expensive cars, among which there was not one that I could recognize. The house was full of people dressed in designer clothes, and judging by their casual manner, easy smiles, and impeccable manners, most of them clearly belonged to Marcus's world, the very world where status is determined by expensive suits, family jewels, and the ability to make small talk with a cold, impeccable smile. The guests were talking, laughing, slowly sipping champagne from thin crystal glasses, and the subtle scent of expensive perfumes was in the air, mixing with the unobtrusive sounds of classical music that was quietly pouring from somewhere in the backyard. I cautiously scanned the crowd, hoping to find at least a few familiar faces, but apart from Uncle Robert, who recently expanded his law firm to include 3 people, and cousins Michael and Rachel, one a heart surgeon, the other a professor, I didn't recognize anyone here. They huddled near the chocolate fountain, looking as if they would rather be somewhere else, but politeness forced them to stay, maintaining faceless conversations and occasionally nodding to the beat of other people's remarks. And then there was a soft sigh of admiration that gradually swept through the living room like a light breeze, and I realized that this meant only one thing: Sarah had made her majestic exit. She descended the stairs slowly, with perfect grace. Her dress of flowing white silk and fine lace glided down the steps, as if emphasizing her every move, and her face shone with triumph, because this evening belonged only to her, and she enjoyed every moment of this celebration. But as soon as her gaze fell on me, the perfect mask gave a tiny crack. Her perfectly made-up lips curled into a slight grimace of displeasure. Her gaze full of undisguised criticism ran over my emerald dress, which an hour ago seemed to me an excellent choice, but now, under her narrowed eyes, I suddenly felt insecure. She walked straight towards me, her heels tapping clearly on the wooden floor, like the blows of a small hammer, and as soon as she was next to me, she hissed through clenched teeth. "Really?" Her tone was filled with condemnation, but so low that no one but me could hear. "Is that what you decided to wear? You look like you're going to the mall, not my engagement party." I looked down at my dress, the one that had recently made me feel beautiful, but before I could respond, a warm, deep voice rang out from behind us. "Here is my beautiful fiancé." Marcus appeared with his parents, and even if Sarah hadn't said his name, it would have been impossible to mistake him for anyone else. He looked like he'd just stepped out of the pages of luxury magazine, in a perfectly tailored navy suit, with a confident smile and the ease of a man accustomed to attention. His parents were standing next to him, and they were also impeccable, sophisticated, elegant, with the same natural restraint possessed only by those who have lived in a world of expensive dinners and exclusive clubs since childhood. But the most amazing thing happened the next moment. As soon as Sarah saw them, it was as if someone had flipped a switch, and her face transformed from stunned to radiant. "Darling!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with softness, and her lips stretched into the sweetest possible smile. She grabbed Marcus's arm, gently pulling him a little closer, and then turned to me with an expression that made my insides clench. "I want to introduce you to someone very special," she announced, and before I could figure out who she was talking about, I heard words that almost made me gasp in surprise. "This is my beloved sister Catherine. We're so close, aren't we, honey?" I blinked, trying to process what had just happened, and I even had to stop myself from checking to see if there was another Catherine standing behind me, to whom these words might have been addressed. Marcus's parents smiled warmly, and his mother took a step forward and grabbed my hands with an expression like she'd been dreaming about meeting me for a long time. "We have heard so much about you," she said with a courtesy that made my throat go dry, because I almost certainly knew it was a lie. I forced a smile, muttering something neutral, catching a warning look from my sister, who seemed to be silently ordering me to stick to the script and not spoil the moment. The hypocrisy of it all was so suffocating that I wanted to scream, but I just smiled, nodded, and let the conversation flow as the evening gradually gathered momentum. The noise of voices grew louder, the clink of glasses echoed through the house, forced laughter mixed with fake stories that no one thought were really funny, but everyone needed to play their part, and with every minute I had only one growing desire: to escape. I did everything that was expected of me. I showed up, smiled, played the insignificant role assigned to me, and now the only thing I wanted was the silence of my apartment. I went to the drinks table, deliberately avoiding the champagne, and instead picked up a glass of pomegranate juice, a dark, deep shade that seemed surprisingly attractive to me. "I'll have a drink, and then I can leave," I thought, making my way through the crowd to where Sarah stood surrounded by future relatives, leading the reception with an impeccable grace that I had never possessed. I was almost at the drinks table when it happened. All of a sudden, someone I'd never seen before pushed me from behind, not too hard, but enough for me to lose my balance and take an awkward step forward. Everything happened in a fraction of a second, but time seemed to slow down in my head. I felt my glass tilt, and the scarlet juice poured out in an elegant arc, flying through the air like some kind of terrible scarlet comet, and with a soft splash spread over the immaculate white silk of Sarah's dress. There was absolute silence in the room. A red spot, bright as fresh blood, spread across the expensive fabric, resembling a slowly blooming flower, and I could only watch helplessly as my sister's expression changed, first snow-white with shock, then filled with anger, furious red, with burning eyes in which real hatred raged. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, reaching for a napkin, feeling a hot wave of panic rise in my throat. "It was an accident, But before I could finish, there was a sharp sound that startled me. Slap in the face. It took me a moment to realize what had happened. My face burned with sudden pain, and the deafening echo of that blow echoed through my head. I blinked, realizing that Sarah had just hit me, right there in front of everyone, without hesitation, without thinking about what anyone might see, without caring about the consequences. She stood in front of me, trembling with rage, tears streaming down her cheeks, blurring her perfectly made-up eyes, and it seemed like she was about to snap again. "You clumsy cow!" She screamed so loudly that some of the guests recoiled. "Get out! Get out of this house right now!" I desperately looked around for support, hoping that at least someone would take my side, that my parents, even if not immediately, would intervene, say something, try to defuse the situation, protect me from this injustice. Mom caught my eye, but her face was cold, hard, as if carved out of stone. "Leave immediately," she said softly, and her voice was trembling, but not with sympathy. There was only disappointment in it. "You've ruined everything." Dad didn't even look at me. He just stood off to the side, staring intently at his shoes, as if it were the most interesting sight in the world. The silence was deafening. I could feel dozens of eyes staring at me. I could feel their burning stares, the whispers of condemnation that came from all sides as I turned around, clutching my purse, and headed for the exit. My legs were heavy, every step seemed difficult, as if I were walking through a viscous swamp, and even the air in the room became somehow dense, stuffy, making it difficult to breathe normally. At the edge of my consciousness, I could hear Marcus's mother's worried voice saying something, but I couldn't make out a word because of the noise in my ears, and then the front door was in front of me, and I walked out without looking back. The road home was a blur. I didn't remember how I got there, how I stopped at traffic lights, how I turned, how I parked at my house. Somehow my hands controlled the car, but my mind seemed to be somewhere far away. It wasn't until I was safely in my own apartment that I finally broke down. I closed the door behind me, without undressing, just slid down its smooth surface and let loose my tears. They weren't the quiet, restrained tears that are shed in moments of mild sadness. They were real, deep, ugly, gasping sobs that shook my entire body, leaving me exhausted, the kind that leave you empty, devastated, broken. I cried with humiliation. From betrayal. From 25 years of disappointment in his own family. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up in the morning with swollen eyes and a nagging headache, my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. A tiny spark of hope flickered in her chest. Maybe she had cooled down. Maybe she realized that she had gone too far. Maybe she wanted to apologize for slapping me in front of all these people. I pressed the answer button, holding the phone to my ear, but I barely had time to say, "Hello," as her voice lashed me like a whip. "You stupid, worthless." She burst into a torrent of expletives, which, if they had been said anywhere else, would have immediately kicked her out of the modeling business. I took the phone away from my ear as she continued her venomous monologue, showering me with words that, if they were knives, would have left me cut to the bone long ago. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, her voice was full of pure, seething anger. "That dress cost $55,000, you clumsy idiot," she hissed like an angry cat. "And you're going to pay for it. Plus $5,000 for moral damages." I clutched the phone in my hands, feeling anger rising inside, mixed with bitterness. Do you have any idea how humiliated I was? I sat there, stunned by the audacity of it all, unable to believe that after everything that had happened, Sarah not only did not feel the slightest remorse, but also demanded compensation from me for what had happened completely by accident. "Do you want me to pay you $5,000 for moral damages?" I repeated, still trying to process the absurdity of her words. "After you hit me in front of everyone? You ruined my engagement." She screamed, and I heard the air in her lungs run out, as she took a sharp breath to continue her tantrum. I slowly ran my fingers over my forehead, trying to keep myself from screaming back, trying to somehow keep control of my emotions. I'll pay for the dress, I said in a flat voice, making an effort not to raise my voice. That's fair enough. It was an accident, but I'll take responsibility. Plus 5,000, she snapped. No. I was surprised at how firm my voice sounded. Actually, you know what? I continued, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that my words would not sink into the void, would not remain a lost battle. After the way you just talked to me, after hitting me in public, I'm not going to pay for anything. I hadn't even hung up when the phone rang again. Mom's number appeared on the screen. I sighed, thinking about switching the call to voicemail, but I knew it would ring over and over until I answered. Hi, I said in a tired voice, already knowing what was waiting for me. Catherine, my mother's voice was harsh, cold, exactly the way it became when I was a child, when I disappointed her, when I got the wrong grades, when I didn't meet her expectations. You need to pay your sister for the dress and for the emotional suffering you caused her. You ruined her engagement. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers to my temples, feeling the headache begin to build. Mom, it was an accident, I tried to explain, hoping for at least a grain of common sense in her words. Someone bumped into me, and in case you forgot, she slapped me in front of everyone. Well, what did you expect? Mom's voice was filled with such incomprehension that something broke inside me. You ruined her $55,000 dress. You humiliated her at the engagement party in front of the entire Marcus family. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was for all of us? I froze. How embarrassing was it for them? I felt something snap inside me, some last fragile thread that kept me in this endless cycle of trying to earn their approval, to be understood, to be accepted. Was it awkward for you? My voice was trembling, but not from fear or sadness, from rage, from the realization of the absurdity of this conversation. What about how awkward it was for me? How about I get slapped in front of a room full of strangers? How about my own parents sided with her after she attacked me? Don't be dramatic, Catherine, Mom said coldly. No, Mom, I interrupted, and this time there wasn't a drop of doubt in my voice, not a single shadow of uncertainty. You and Dad should have stood up for me. You should have said something when she hit me. You're my parents too. Or have you forgotten? There was a long pause. When Mom finally spoke, her voice was icy. Listen carefully, Catherine, she said slowly, enunciating each word as if she were dictating an unquestionable ultimatum. Either you pay your sister what she asks for, or your dad and I don't talk to you anymore. It's your choice. I froze, letting those words sink in. And then she laughed. But there was not a drop of joy in that laugh, not an ounce of fun. It was the laugh of a man who suddenly realized the absurdity of the situation, the absurdity of 25 years spent trying to be a good daughter to parents who had never considered her equal to a second daughter, who finally realized that he was chasing something unreachable. You know, Mom, I said, and my voice was calm, surprisingly calm, despite the storm inside. It doesn't pose much of a threat anymore. The silence on the other end of the line was almost palpable. I will no longer fight for a place in this family. I heard her take a short breath, but I didn't give her a chance to interrupt me. I won't be compared to her anymore. I'm not going to be treated like I'm worth less than her anymore. I breathed in, closed my eyes, and let the last words fall from my lips, let them free themselves from the depths of my soul, allowed myself to get rid of this endless torture once and for all. Don't worry about not talking to me anymore. I exhaled. I don't want to talk to any of you anymore. I hung up before my mom could answer, then turned off the phone and just sat there, feeling a weight rise in my chest. I needed a break from them all, from their endless demands, their accusations, their inability to see me as anything but an eternal backdrop for Sarah's radiance. When I turned on my phone again an hour later, the screen was immediately filled with dozens of new messages. From Sarah. I opened the first one and regretted it a second later. You're just jealous because you're a fat nobody. My fingers trembled, but I continued reading. You've always been a disgrace to the family, you can't even walk properly. You're a clumsy elephant. I felt something turn over inside, but I kept scrolling. Don't worry about coming to the wedding, you weren't invited anyway. Have fun in your dreary little rented apartment while I live in luxury with Marcus. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to finish reading. You will die alone and destitute while I live my best life in our mansion. The endless stream of boasting about her future wealth and superiority continued, but I could barely see the words anymore. Everything was blurring before my eyes from the growing anger, from the realization of how deeply Sarah was convinced of her own infallibility. And then something inside me clicked. My fingers flew over the keyboard before I could stop myself. You mean the house that belongs to Marcus' parents? The one you'll be staying in as a guest? For the first time in all this nightmare, there was a pause. The first silence lasted for long seconds, which seemed like hours to me. And then the phone exploded with new messages. Do you think you're that smart? Sarah wrote, and even through the screen, her irritation was almost palpable. These old fools won't understand what's gotten into them. Marcus's parents are complete idiots. New money. I have no idea how to protect them. Give me 6 months, and they'll eat out of my hands. I stared at the screen in horror. 1 year at most, and I'll make them sign everything on me. My throat went dry, but the messages continued. Marcus is even dumber than they are. He actually believes that I'm in love with him. Can you imagine this boring, soft-hearted fool? But he's my ticket to a good life, so I'll play any role I need to. Laughing emojis were added to the messages, and then, as if nothing had happened, she returned to the threats. Don't forget, $10,000 by the end of the week. Or not. And don't think that I won't make your life hell if you don't pay, you pathetic loser. I sat and stared at the phone for a long time, feeling something new growing inside, something cold and hard that replaced the usual pain and resentment. I thought about Marcus's mother, how kind she was to me at the party, how she tried to make me feel welcome, despite my sister's behavior. I remembered her warm voice, her sincere smile, and the light touches she used to show her concern. They deserved to know the truth. Before I could talk myself out of it, I opened Sarah's social media profile and found Mrs. Hamilton's account. My finger hovered over the send message button for a moment before I pressed it. Mrs. Hamilton, hello. This is Catherine, Sarah's sister, from the engagement party. I feel like I should introduce myself properly, considering how chaotic things have become that evening. Her answer came surprisingly quickly. Catherine, dear, I was hoping to hear from you. I'm so sorry about what happened at the party. I had a serious conversation with Sarah about her behavior. She feels terrible about hitting you, and she assured me that she would call and apologize. I laughed out loud, and it sounded better in the silence of my apartment. Actually, Mrs. Hamilton, that's why I'm writing to you. Sarah didn't apologize. Instead, she demanded $10,000 from me, $5,000 for the dress and $5,000 for what she calls emotional damage. A few seconds later, the answer came. It can't be true. She told me that she feels terrible about her reaction and understands that it was just an accident. My hands remained steady as I typed my answer, even though my heart was pounding in my chest, realizing that this moment could be the point of no return. I have proof that she was actually talking. Not only about money, but also about things that you and your family should know before the wedding. I began methodically taking screenshots, every disgusting message from my sister, every threat, every cruel comment about Marcus and his family, every boast about how she was going to manipulate them, rob them, force them to sign her own fortune. I sent them all, one by one, letting the truth speak for itself. The weekend after I posted these screenshots was frighteningly quiet. There were no messages from my sister, no calls from my parents, just a thick, oppressive silence, like the calm before a storm. I was right. Early on Saturday morning, loud, aggressive bangs on the door woke me from a shallow sleep. I sat up abruptly, my heart pounding in my temples, and went to the door and peered through the peephole. My sister's face was contorted with rage. "Open this door, you traitorous snake." Her scream was so loud that it probably woke up the whole floor. "Open it right now." I took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly, keeping my breathing steady before answering through the door. "I'm not letting you in, Sarah. Say what you need to say and leave. You've ruined everything." Her voice rose to a screech. "Marcus called off the wedding. His mother showed him those messages. You had no right to send them." I clenched my fingers tighter, restraining myself from retaliating with anger. "I sent them because they deserved to know the truth," I replied flatly. "They needed to find out who they were really dealing with. You did it on purpose." She practically choked on her anger. "You sent these messages to his mother because you're jealous of me. You've always been jealous." I shook my head, even knowing she wouldn't see it. "No, Sarah," I said calmly but firmly. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. These people deserve to know that you were going to steal from them, that you were bullying them and using their son." In response, she shouted a stream of obscenities, so dirty that I almost felt sorry for the elderly neighbors, who probably heard every word she said. And then I heard her heels tapping on the hallway floor, and the last, "I'm going to make you pay for this," echoed down the stairs before everything went quiet. I had just caught my breath when the phone rang. "Of course, Mom." I closed my eyes, wondering for a second if I should answer at all, but then I pressed the call button anyway. "What have you done?" Mom's voice was shrill, full of panic and anger. "Your sister is desperate. You must fix this immediately." I gripped the phone tighter. "Fix what?" "Call Marcus's mother." "Stop it," she demanded. "Tell her that you faked these messages because you were jealous of your sister's happiness." I suddenly felt the weight of this whole conversation pin me down on the couch. "I'm not doing this," I said slowly, clearly, so that she could hear every word. "The messages were real, and you know it. Sarah has shown her true colors, and now she has to deal with the consequences." "You're a mean, envious girl," Mom spat out. "We always knew that you were jealous of your sister's success, but this is a new low." I closed my eyes, inhaling, exhaling, and this time I felt something new, not anger, not pain, not a desire to justify myself or prove my case. Just fatigue. "I'm done," I said softly. "I'm done with all this. Don't call me anymore." And I hung up the phone. After a few seconds, I blocked their numbers. In the following days, I started hearing rumors from my cousin Rachel, who was probably the only one in the family who didn't think I was a fiend. Marcus didn't just cancel the wedding. He broke up with Sarah completely. As it turned out, his mother showed him and his father all the messages, every word she said, every offensive comment about them, every admission that she manipulated them. He found out that he had never been more than a stepping stone to wealth for her, and if at the beginning he might have tried to justify her behavior, then after reading the messages he had no doubts. Sarah was living with her parents now. She was crying. She told everyone who would listen that I ruined her life out of jealousy. Mom and Dad supported her version of events. They painted me as a vindictive younger sister who couldn't stand her happiness. I heard this and realized that the final breakup was inevitable. The following Monday, I spent my lunch break watching apartment listings. I found a place to live a little bigger than my current apartment, in an area that I've always liked. I thought that I would feel sadness. I thought that bitterness would remain in me, but when I signed the lease, I felt only one thing: peace. Some might call it revenge. But this is not the case. It was justice. And when I carried the last box to my new apartment, I knew that for the first time in a long time I would sleep peacefully. That night. And every next one. Because I chose self-respect over a toxic world.